the idea of hecklers stopped happening with our people because we're able to speak back, to speak forcefully, and to speak truthfully. And to say, let's have a disagreement about oil and gas projects. But please stop telling people that our project is causing miscarriages.
Welcome again, yet to another edition of our podcast, where we are speaking to people who are engaged in the sector, people who are knowledgeable enough. And today I have with me the evergreen senior lawyer, Mr. Ellison Karuhanga, who has somehow, during the period of COVID, morphed into a journalist, especially fighting against the green activists that were pushing back on some of the projects in Uganda. Welcome, Ellison. And you could probably add on to this introduction that I just gave.
Thank you, Agri. It's always a pleasure and certainly an honor to be here. I think I'm sure I didn't turn into a journalist. I just turned into an argumentative lawyer, which is what I was already.
Okay, so thank you very much for sparing the time. I'll be asking a couple of questions with some follow-up questions, and I would like to start to ask based on where we have come from as an industry for oil and gas especially, and based on the conversations that we've been having, the articles you've been writing, and today where we've seen some global shift of people getting back into fossil fuels, Germany firing back their coal plants, Donald Trump saying drill baby drill, and firing off all these activists and telling them they don't know what they are doing, is that for the country like the USA of this magnitude still needs power, still needs reliable sources of power to be able to run their economy. And then finally last month, finalizing our financial closure on the ECOP, which was one of our big projects, and then very recently closing down on the refinery project. What, in your view, is the trend of these global directions and shifts?
I think that's a very good question. You know, if we isolated our story 4 years ago, and the industry here went through very many other challenges, corporate challenges, regulatory challenges, taxation issues. But in the last 3 or 4 years, there was an onslaught. Actually, in the last 4 years, we saw an onslaught, particularly against this project, the ECOP project and the refinery project in Uganda. And the global idea was to make Uganda an example, to ensure that once the Ugandan project doesn't proceed, an African project will not proceed. And there was almost like a global consensus that in the energy transition, the continent of Africa must leapfrog the rest of the world and jump to develop using renewables, was the argument that was given. I remember former vice president of the US at one of the COPs said that don't follow our bad example. Now, when that came from a broad level, as a strategic direction that many global thinkers were taking, at a tactical level, how they intended to influence this decision, of course, was to ensure that banks don't finance projects in Africa. And ECOP really was the lightning rod project for the entire space. And the Western media provided a very fantastic coverage. The Wall Street Journal, the BBC, the Guardian, the New York Times, the National Geographic, The Economist. So the tactic was create a global consensus, what they call global, meaning the West in the West, get the consensus and make sure
Bad
that
consensus.
a
in your
global.
view? Yeah, global bad consensus.
Well, bad is one thing, but the first idea was get a global consensus about the Ugandan project.
Okay.
And in order to do that, they sold certain things. Now that's where the bad comes in. Because you can have one view or another view about a project. But it was decided that some of the problems with EACOP are that it passes through Lake Victoria. It does not. That 40 million people are going to die if we build a pipeline. No person is going to die from the building of a pipeline. A pipeline has never been known by its construction to cause death. Among the causes of death, if you go to postmortems, they can't say lived near a pipeline. But 40 million were to die. The whole of Lake Victoria was to be polluted. The Lake Victoria basin was at risk. All the lions, cheetahs, elephants, and giraffes in the whole world were dying. There were no more birds that were going to fly. The late Pope was even given a visit by some people, and they gave him a map of EACOP really cutting through Lake Victoria.
76 rivers.
A member of parliament from the European Union published a list of the rivers that EACOP would be going through, meaning the whole of Uganda was underwater. I know sometimes it rains and it can feel like that. But we saw, so in order to generate this concept, and then it became consistent. The BBC had it. The BBC even ran a report saying when Ugandans began speaking back that is coordinated and inauthentic. And they complained to Twitter and Facebook to close some of those accounts. So at that time when that started, we looked and we said, but you guys, what is this? So we don't have the Wall Street Journal, we don't have. And the idea is that they can generate a consensus, they can create young Ugandan activists, they can get people, they got some people to go screaming at one of the oil companies. They went to GAPCO. I have no idea what GAPCO had got to do with anything. They went there to not to build EACOP. And the other guys were saying, where is EACOP? So we embarked on in our small little voices, we said no. They actually aren't 230 rivers. There's one crossing and it will be crossed using horizontal directional drilling. There's no Lake Victoria. And we started this fight. And so when you look at the global shift, it is not correct to just call it a global shift without specializing on the struggle and the arguments around the Ugandan project. And those arguments around the Ugandan project, no doubt, influenced a lot of thinking. Before you knew it, Ugandan officials, I give a lot of credit to the Minister of Energy, were able to go to these international conferences, stand their ground. The idea of hecklers stopped happening with our people because we're able to speak back, to speak forcefully, and to speak truthfully. And to say, let's have a disagreement about oil and gas projects. But please stop telling people that our project is causing miscarriages. Yeah? You're talking about now Germany started firing up coal. Germany, the BBC ran a story about the EU Parliament closing down, and to their credit, they gave us audience. And I remember I appeared on the BBC. But the EU Parliament resolution, the very next story was Germany was opening coal plants. So Germany has not opened coal plants now. Biden, you're talking about Trump saying drill, baby, drill. Biden, I remember, said Exxon is richer than God, and yet they're not exploiting almost 900 licenses that they have. The United Kingdom opened hundreds of licenses in the North Sea. Norway, at that same time, opened 83 licenses. It was and then the argument was, you be the example. Don't be like us. Leapfrog. And us were saying, excuse me, the Uganda today uses less electricity than the people who heat their swimming pools in the state of California. Alone. Uganda, 45 million of us, all the rich people in Uganda, all the powerful people in Uganda cannot consume as much electricity as the heated swimming pools of California. So someone was saying, you leapfrog. So my friend, how can we jump from darkness into darkness? And so, for me, the debate, yes, there's a new administration in the US, but I think even before we saw a change of the administration in the US, a strong argument had certainly been raised by our ability to speak up. So when we talk about global trends and global changes, we must not run away from the fact that our project would have been tanked.
Yes, I do agree with you that probably the shift did not start with Trump. But I think Trump is the first president who has been emphatic about the fact that the country needs energy and drilling must go on. Because the rest have allowed for these drilling processes to go on. They relicensed new areas without making it a government position. It's only Trump who has come and said, this is a government position, and even banned paper straws. And said, what's wrong with you guys? Go and manufacture your plastic straws. These people are jokers because we know that we need the energy and the industries must go on.
Exactly.
So that was my question, is that
Looking
at how the US has taken that direction, do you think everyone else is going to follow suit?
Absolutely. The US was always going to take that direction. And I started taking that direction. Because what happened with the renewable industry was very simple. There was a very simple shift in renewables. And what was the shift? The Chinese completely decided to ignore the ESG talk. And they went and built an average of 2 coal plants a day. 2 coal plants. And you know what were they using the coal for? Do you know what they're using the coal for? To make electric vehicles that they would sell in Europe and in China. So China became the largest producer of electric vehicles because they had the largest amount
of energy.
Dirty energy. To make
energy.
Yes, what you call dirty energy. What some people call dirty energy. Coal. To make cars for the American market. So the Americans...
To make clean cars.
Yes. So the Americans who were trying to move to the clean cars ended up having a problem. That the only way it was affordable. Because 4 years ago, an electric car was very expensive.
Oh, yes.
In Kampala today, there's a charging point for electric cars at post office. I don't know if you know it.
Yes, I know it.
At post office, you can bring an electric car here and you can move. And once you charge your car, you can reach Ginger. In a few months...
coming back. Because there's no charging point.
There'll be a charging point in Ginger. Very soon there'll be a charging point in Ginger. But that distance means you can drive around Clark for a very long time. Actually, it can be much more cost effective than fuel, for example, for some people. And there's actually a proper charging point, only that you have to go through jam. So if your battery starts dying around Greenland, you may have a problem. But, so the Chinese did that. So a certain point reached when the Americans would have to take stock and say, we need to slow down what they're calling this green revolution because the Chinese are cheating. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. Yeah, I don't have to put this. But what was happening was it was an unfair market. The Chinese decided on the one hand to ignore
and accelerate.
To ignore ESG and then at the same time to accelerate ESG. Yes. So if you're talking about, and then they went around the world collecting all critical mineral positions. Now you have this trade war between America and China, and you can see one of the worst affected companies is likely to be Elon Musk's Tesla.
And all technology companies, because they have really put a stop on the exporting of critical minerals to American companies.
So they went using again, because they were mass consumption industry, they were just using oil and gas and coal to make all this electricity, to make all these renewables. And so I think why Trump becomes popular and why Trump talks about drill, baby, drill. While Trump is saying drill, you realize that the Democrats never really argued back against that point. Because theirs was the politics of hypocrisy. On the one hand, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the IMF were simply not allowed to lend to oil and gas projects. And then on the other hand, America was drilling, opening up federal lands for drilling, so there was that project, I think it was in Alaska, where
Keystone.
Not the Keystone, there's the project the Biden administration licensed. Yeah, where they said, yeah, we can do it. If the most industrialized country in the history of the world, the United States, the richest country in the history of humanity, by far, is going back to oil and gas. Then you can imagine the Republic of Uganda, where yesterday or 2 days ago, there was a blackout in Spain.
Yes, I was coming to that.
There was load shedding in Spain and Portugal.
Spain and Portugal. Up to today.
For a day. They had a day without power. Do you know that the people here were reading and saying, what kind of crisis is this? This is also a crisis.
Yes.
People are shocked that electricity can go. There are people who are shocked that electricity can go. While some of us,
So
depending on where you're coming from, some of us are very shocked
on
that
that
the
specific
electricity hasn't yet gone.
on that specific point, the conversation has been around the fact that, okay, right now they have gone into a blackout. And technically that is net zero emission for them. So do they want to stay in that conversation? Because they have been pushing for net zero as the European Union. So now that Spain and Portugal is net zero, because they're not polluting, but they don't have power. They also have net darkness. So is that the conversation that they'd want to have? Because that's what they've been driving towards. So when you compare where they are now and the fact that they have defunded all fossil fuels, they are defunding and they're promoting a lot of renewables, which are actually, like for example, solar, hugely subsidized. Subsidies that they probably could not be able to afford. As a country like Uganda, what do you think we should be doing? Should we continue on that path of trying to balance, or we optimize what we have to build our own energy security?
Uganda needs to build a situation where the loss of power is a national crisis, not a normal thing.
Yes, I agree with you.
Right now, the Eiffel Tower in Paris may be using more energy than Kampala. For all you know. We cannot continue to imagine that we are all operating at the same level. You can't operate at a level where the state of Alabama, 4 million people, consumes more electricity than the continent of Africa of 1 billion people. What is that? What kind of equity is that? Why does this consensus imagine that Africans do not need electricity? Why does it imagine that the state of Alabama needs more electricity than Africa? Portugal and Spain, I can guarantee you, if you check their emissions versus ours, we are the net zero. They are not if they are not emitting now, I can tell you,
They have
then
a
for us
balance.
we have never emitted. There is no question in my mind that people we're always comparing different things. Right now in Uganda, our biggest environmental threat is poverty. The argument which some people were making was that we need to conserve the environment. But what they were really saying is we need to conserve poverty. If you remain at this level of darkness
And development.
then there will be no emissions. That is also false. The darker we get, the worse it is for the environment. Why? Because we are cutting down those trees. The Congo used to be a carbon sink for the world. All the forests there are what they are using to sink into the world. So how do you think people are going to eat? Charcoal. The deforestation of Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya is one of the world's worst records at the moment. Wetlands are being taken over, trees are being cut, people have nowhere to live, nothing to eat. They will cut down and destroy the environment in ways you can't imagine. So we need in Uganda to build that refinery yesterday. Actually, we have a crisis. If in Portugal they are calling one blackout a crisis, and it's on CNN, it's on BBC, then for us we should be ashamed of ourselves that we are not. We find, you wake up and they say there's no power. There's no
And you
power.
say it's okay, you
No,
go to
now
work.
in every neighborhood now, Umeme left, but we used to have a WhatsApp group. And every neighborhood in the WhatsApp groups, they have their Umeme guy on. They tell him, when is it coming back? The guy says 12 p.m. The guy says, okay, it's Kawa. We can't be comfortable in darkness. We cannot develop by moving from darkness to deeper darkness, as someone once said, in a night that has no stars. And that's what we are looking for. We're looking, at least go for some stars. And poverty. If someone once wanted to argue that poverty is how we should conserve the environment, that was not just an immoral argument. It's a bankrupt argument. Then we must distinguish between poverty conservation and environmental conservation, and not imagine that the conservation of poverty will save the environment. The largest threat to Uganda's environment today is underdevelopment.
So basically, Ellison, if I hear you correctly, you're saying as a country we need to focus more on developing our nation, irrespective of the concerns, or we need to focus on developing our country, balancing with the planet anyway. But we should not discard all the energy sources that we have for the benefit of the environment.
Yes.
Because the negative effects of non-development or poverty or low development actually outweigh our moving forward with the energy sources that we have.
Precisely. And I'm not even saying that we should be careless. I don't want to be misunderstood to be saying we should go and dump things in Lake Victoria. After all, Nord Stream blew up in the North Sea or whatever sea it blew up in, and methane gas was blown there. I'm not saying we need to be irresponsible. I'm not saying we shouldn't take cognizance of the environment that we are living in. We mustn't degrade wetlands. We mustn't destroy forests. We mustn't dump endlessly. We mustn't pollute. In Uganda, in 1994, the right to a clean and healthy environment was enshrined in the Constitution in 94. That is before
all these conversations
started. The National Environment Act, the first one, was in the 90s. That's before these conversations started. The National Forestry Authority was not formed as a result of a consensus in Rio de Janeiro or in Paris. It was formed as a result of a consensus here in Kampala. So I am not saying that Uganda is or needs to be environmentally careless. But at the same time, we must understand that we have a massive energy deficit. We cannot, if we try to sacrifice the environment for development, or if we try to sacrifice development for the environment, both will suffer. We must protect our environment and we must develop our resources. That's the best way to protect both.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that clarifies a lot of things. Ellison, I'd like to move on from that conversation and go a bit legal. On the legal front, you've heard this morning about some of the opportunities around the energy sector. Then earlier today, we heard on the podcast the former Uganda Law Society chairperson, Fiona Wall, and she's spoken about some of the gaps within the energy space, things that are not being done. For example, she highlighted a very surprising figure, that 80% of legal contracts, for example, in the energy space are actually contracted to foreign entities. So what would be your view in how the chamber would engage? And I had a conversation with the minister also here on the podcast. How can we as a chamber engage with the regulator, with the ministry, to make sure that we bring in place a proper legislation framework for national participation?
Generally or in the legal space?
Generally, including the legal space. I highlighted the legal space because it was a statistic that was shared here earlier, and it was very shocking.
You just think of two cities in the world. You think of what happened. I don't know if it's a city, and I don't know if I can say this, but Port Harcourt.
Yep. That's in Nigeria for those who are not aware.
And Aberdeen in the North Sea. In the UK, in Scotland. Aberdeen was the UK's oil city, and I think was the second richest city in the UK after London. Port Harcourt was the Nigerian oil city, one of the poorest in Nigeria.
It's one of the poorest
in Nigeria,
but it's the oil city.
And in Nigeria, for the last I don't know how many years, as a national budgetary consideration, 10% of the Nigerian budget goes into the oil area for the longest time. 10%. What they get from tomatoes, Nigeria is the largest producer of tomatoes.
That is slightly below one of the SDG goals on agriculture, which is about 15%.
But this goes to Port Harcourt
alone.
Yes, 10% of the Nigerian budget at one point used to go to the oil areas. And all that was happening there were gunmen moving around, kidnapping expatriates.
For ransom.
At one time, they had to execute the Nigerian activist Ken Saro-Wiwa, I think in 2000. Aberdeen Oil provided a lot of wealth to the UK Treasury. Did not receive back a single cent in subsidy from the UK government. When the UK government got money from the oil areas, you know what they would do with that money? They would invade Iraq. So what happened? Why is it that the place where you're investing money is poorer than the place where you're just taking the money out? Local content. The integration of local industry. The fact that all these companies, I'm sorry, that are here, many of them are from Aberdeen. They come here as expatriates. What expatriates?
I know, and you also Aberdeen
graduate. Even me myself, I come from Aberdeen. Even me, I'm an Aberdonian export. Yeah? And you look and you say, you look at the industry. You land at Aberdeen Airport and you see the companies that you're seeing here. That's where their home is. People making pipes, people welding, people doing stuff. If you don't integrate business and industry into this economy, and someone thinks that the government of Uganda is going to sit there and send royalties without letting people earn and do business. Local content is about development of capacity, services, spending, growth,
and national dignity.
And it is so important that we are able to build. Look at Brazil. Look at the industry that built up just when Lula, the leader of Brazil in his first term, just look at the industry. Look at the sort of development that happened in a decade in Brazil just as a result of integrating local industry. Look at Nigeria and just simply the growth. Today as we speak, for the last so many years, the largest export, believe it or not, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to the Federal Republic of Nigeria was refined petroleum.
Petroleum products.
Bonelite crude. Nigerian oil would leave Nigeria unrefined. And the UK's largest export to Nigeria was Nigerian refined
crude
petroleum. Today, Nigerian local business, not Nigerian government, Nigerian businessmen put up billions of dollars and put in place one of the world's newest and most incredible refining products, which has led to the closing of some refineries in the West. If you don't understand that years of developing the local capacity of a Nigerian businessman to see the need for a refinery, you can do it in government. You can write a white paper. You know, I don't know your podcast, but I don't know how much trouble I can get into. You know, one time the government wrote a white paper on public service reform. That was in 1999. So they are still discussing the white paper on public service reform. If you're going to move at the pace of state actors, the government can't do business. Let the business people do business, and the result of that will be growth and development. One of the big challenges is you go to a country in East Africa. There's a country in East Africa, which I'll not mention because I want to go there soon. When you land in that country, it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. So well developed. Actually, you think you're in Europe. You drive on the best roads, and it's not the one you're thinking. You drive on the best roads.
I'm not thinking, I'm just listening.
You drive on the best roads in this country in East Africa. Has a highest sense of business. Every Ugandan literally goes there. It has the highest trade at its border. It's Uganda's largest consumer of everything. It's our largest trading partner. It's an incredible business. During the time of their previous president,
you don't have to say the name.
15 years ago.
Yeah?
They just built up these highways. You know, you take so many hours going to the airport, and now you just take a few minutes. And the whole place was built on Chinese debt. Where are the local construction companies?
None. And this is the conversation I was having with the regulator and the minister. that if we can't build local capacity, then there's no value in any industry that we are trying to put together. And I'll give an interesting statistic. I know my friend here, Chairman Jimmy, who is the Norwegian ambassador to Uganda, honorary council. I got an interesting statistic from someone that Norway currently is making more money outside of Norway from petroleum than it is making inside of Norway. And why? Because they built so much local capacity that they are able to export all these through expatriates, through service companies, through concessions, whatever it is. They make more money outside of their own jurisdiction than inside of Norway. And this is what we need to build as a country. So, aligned to the conversation you've been having and the discussions I've been having with the regulator, I had with the Fiona Wall, I had with the minister, is I think we need for the broader energy space to make sure that we are doing exactly what petroleum has done across the different energy platforms. Because without that, we are going to be left with the short end of the stick as a country. Because at the end of the day, if everyone comes and builds dams, and we spoke about, or rather I spoke about the issue around Karuma and Isimba. These are projects that have taken over 10 years. And they have still not been done well.
At 99%.
Up to today, we are trying to manage some of the structural issues that have been left behind. Now, even in 10 years, apart from probably UGCL coming online, there's no single Ugandan company that you can speak of that probably has built its capacity in generation projects. And I would like to see some of them. So, my question to you was that as a legal person, how can we be able to work with the government to make sure that we can curate something around local content, national content within the broader energy spectrum? Because without that, I mean, it's all icing and no cake for Uganda. Because after 5-10 years, when all the projects are done, we have nothing to leave behind.
I agree with you. You know, it's good you mentioned Jimmy. You know, there's a time Jimmy was well, I think he'll remind us when the Petroleum Acts were passed.
The PSs? Or
no, the Acts, the 2013
okay, 2013.
Acts. I think Jimmy was in Talo at that time. And the Honorable Ali Salaso, to her great credit,
yes,
passed on her own
48%
of the Petroleum Act, saying we need to insert 48%.
Yeah.
And the oil industry, I remember there was a conference here, and the Ugandans said yes, and the oil industry said, you guys,
be careful.
what do you own as businesses?
Yeah.
If you say 48% when I land here, you don't have an airline. Can I not come on an airline? When I go to the hotel, you don't have a hotel. If I want to advertise in a newspaper, you don't have a newspaper. That's Ugandan. You have a government one. And if I want to go on the radio, which radio am I going to? The only thing you have are taxis. I remember someone made that comment here.
I recall.
Huh? And people looked at him. They said, okay.
But the law was there.
But the law was there.
Exactly.
The Honorable Ali Salaso has heard the argument. In fact, the argument had been taken to her. And she was told, you say you don't understand petroleum, you need a course. She said, yeah, I'll do the course later. But now, amendment, Mr. Speaker, 48%. And the company is here. And the business is here.
And they are benefiting.
And the airline is here.
We are 2.2 billion into the project as Ugandan companies.
No. And even that, there's a lot of... Anyway, let me not say that. I don't know how far this thing goes. But even that, there are things we need to look into. So, the first thing is, I agree, the law should come into play. That statistics on law firms, when you just think about the fact, companies prefer to use foreign law firms. But
then they outsource local law firms,
yes,
who eventually do the work.
some of the work.
Yes, for 10% the cost, the price.
Yes. We had just the pricing of Uganda. There's an African discount. Just the fact that you're African.
There's a presumed African discount.
You see, you go into a project and you say, now we are going to advise
XYZ International.
the chamber. And the two advisors of the chamber are a Ugandan lawyer and a lawyer from the city of London. Both of them are going to use 1 hour to do a contract. It's very easy for the government, and the government is trying to change that, to be fair, from legal services. But it's very easy for the government, for the oil industry, for anyone to say, I will pay $900 to $2,000 an hour for advice from England, and I am not willing to pay more than $100 for advice from a Ugandan. Both of us are using 1 hour. We are both advising on the same contract.
Why is that?
The only difference. The only difference is melanin. The only difference is
or the lack of it.
Or the lack of it. I think there's a compensation for. Now, there's a lot of fight back and a lot of change. Part of the problem was initially a lot of African and Ugandan lawyers accepted it. You go and say, no, this is the way of the world.
No, because if you don't accept it, you will not actually get a contract.
Yes, but I think in the last few years, we're trying to see a pushback from the sector to say...
So that's why we need protection of the government.
Yes.
Because as long as you're making money from the country, there must be laws that guide and govern that process.
The government has tried, but they have never just done a contract. I've not yet seen a contract. But I know there was an idea with dispute resolution, for example, international arbitration, that the Ugandans must lead. We had here, again, Jimmy will forgive me for keeping to mention him. We had here, Jimmy had tax disputes when he was managing an oil company.
Yes.
And I think it was them, the private oil companies, that actually hired Ugandan private counsel to go and support them. The Uganda government, of course, used a team of civil servants and foreign lawyers. And for what it's worth, whatever happened. But, so I hear you. We need regulation. We need legislation. We need regulation to move away. Because one of the things that happened to dilute the Alaso Amendment were the national content regulations.
Yes.
And we must accept, Powell will forgive me, but we must accept that what Powell passed was a direct dilution of Alaso. Because what Alaso was looking at was shareholding. What Powell introduced removed
was
shareholding.
Value.
So all of a sudden, a Chinese national state corporation under the national content regulations could become a Ugandan company. That we need to go back to the spirit of the law in which it was passed, and we need to go back to, because you see, it's not protectionism when you think about it. It's affirmative action, but it's not even just affirmative action. It is the fact that there's a time they would say that the poor man cannot sleep because he's hungry, and the rich man cannot sleep because the poor man is awake. So it was in the interest of everybody that the poor man gets some food.
It is in the interest of everyone.
So it is in the interest of everyone that...
And I think Uganda shouldn't be shy in passing some of these legislations.
Yes.
Because anywhere else you go in the world, they actually have a bit of protectionism for their own companies and peoples. Yes. So why should Uganda and Africans be shy about doing the same?
And also, if you're going to come to Uganda, because it's good to get, because we're a net import of capital, come into Uganda, fine. Come, invest. We welcome you. But domesticate your operation.
Absolutely.
Let us see. You can't have the sort of wage disparities that we are seeing in this sector. It's a bit of an embarrassment where someone says that one guy is worth
15, 30 Ugandans. Yeah, so basically that's and more are conversations that as a chamber we are taking on with the respective government institutions to have this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not be able to exhaust the brain and all the information from Mr. Ellison, but we'll hope to have him back again. This is just a snapshot of the areas where he has a lot of passion, and we look forward to engaging you once again. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you, and of course I will greet the lawyers who are watching. They're about to vote for me.
Uganda Chamber of Energy and Minerals, for a sustainable future.